Welcome back to the Radio Academy podcast. I'm your host, Georgie Jameson, and this week we ask, how do you rebrand a successful podcast and why? Russell Howard's podcast with Avalon, Wonderbox, has now changed its name to 5 Brilliant Things. I chatted to the show's producer, Dan Atkinson, who has worked with Russell for over a decade, starting with the pilot for Russell Howard's Good News on BBC Three. Dan and I talked about working with Adelicious and a new Patreon show involving the listeners. But to start with, I asked Dan about the name change. And in order to explain that, he went back to why the podcast used to be called Wonderbox in the first place.
The idea of a Wonderbox is a sort of an old German tradition, actually, where you take things that you really love and then put them in this box to sort of look at from time to time and reminisce about why it means something to you. And this is something that Russell's had around in his brain for a few years, actually, in different ways. And then when it came to him wanting to make a podcast, he thought it was a great start point. I mean, it seems obvious that calling it Wonderbox would be the best way to sort of do that. It did encapsulate what the podcast was about. But when you just say the word Wonderbox, it doesn't mean anything unless you explain what I've just said. And the podcast space is enormously crowded. There are all sorts of offerings for everything you could want. And so sometimes it pays to be a little bit more clear in what the podcast is offering. So Russell's name is on the podcast title, and so people who know and like Russell will tune in. But to anyone else who doesn't know his name, what does Wonderbox really mean? And there's a brilliant description of it if you look in the description of the podcast. But that's like being on a crowded high street where everyone else has got brilliant flashy signs on the outside of their shop, and we've got a little plaque inside the shop telling everyone what they're going to get. It's no good in there.
No, they've already found the podcast if they're reading the description of the podcast, haven't they?
Exactly. So we had a chat and we just thought maybe it would help more people to find us if we were more clear about what the podcast actually is. And we felt 5 Brilliant Things told the story in 3 words of what people get when they come in. So maybe people who didn't know Russell before will come and give it a go and then enjoy the interviews.
There are strategies and risks, though, that come with changing something that listeners are familiar with. I can see the idea why you've done it, but how did you go about rebranding it?
Well, we were going to go the Jaguar route and get rid of everything people love and antagonise everyone.
That's so funny because today I said to somebody, I'm talking about a podcast about rebranding, and they mentioned Jaguar as well.
yeah, we just wanted to get some of that hatred. There are risks, obviously, and we did talk that through, but we felt that if you're listening to the podcast and you've listened to more than one episode, then you probably enjoy what we're offering. And it still arrives for free on your phone or on your Spotify or Apple or wherever you get it. It's still there. And the only thing that's changed is the name. I wouldn't actually call what we've done necessarily a rebrand. If the brand of something is everything you offer, to give an example, Nike's brand isn't the swoosh, that's their logo. Their brand is offering sportswear and it's a very clear brand. And we've changed our name, but we haven't changed our brand. So all of the icons surrounding our show, our colour palette, all those design choices, they're still actually the same as the old named show. So I wouldn't say that we've necessarily done a full rebrand. Like Russell isn't suddenly doing sort of angsty goth comedy. It's still the same interviews with people about things they love. So in terms of the risks, we felt that people who were already there wouldn't be turned off and we hoped people wouldn't be turned off by us changing the name. And really that is the primary risk, I think, is people becoming cross because you've changed something they love. But hopefully the change isn't too big.
No, if the change is just the name, then hopefully they'll listen and know that the change isn't too big. But what about the strategy then of getting that message out there that we've changed the name, but don't worry, the content is just as you would always want it to be?
Yeah, I mean, you've really summarised how we tried to communicate the message change. So we did do press release on the change. We wanted to let people know that it's changed, but we didn't pull out all the stops because fundamentally it is just a name change. You don't want to go shouting from the rooftops that you've got something very exciting to tell people when actually we've changed the name. So we let people know, and we wanted to let people know that nothing that they loved had changed, and hopefully this would be all positive. We've also timed it to coincide with launching our Patreon show at the same time.
Now, that is a change, though, isn't it? Because you've added this subscriber element. So tell us a bit about what that means working in conjunction with Patreon.
It made sense to change our name at the same time that we were going to increase the offering that we're giving to people. So we have started a partnership with Patreon offering an extra show. So the main show is called 5 Brilliant Things, where the guests come on and talk about the things in their life that they adore the most. Some of them stupid, some of them very moving. And then the Patreon show we're making, let me put it this way instead. What do people want when they engage with a Patreon show? And we think that what they want is to get real ownership of the show and to feel more involved and to fundamentally connect with the makers of the show on a meaningful level. I think that's how we approached it. So what we've come up with is making the show in conjunction with the Patreon listeners. So the show on Patreon is called 5 Brilliant Questions. And so we ask our Patreon followers to give us the questions that they would want to hear from our upcoming guests. And then Russell will put those questions to the guest, and we make a chat show along with the listeners. That will hopefully over time develop relationships between the listeners and the guests, and particular listeners will get a sort of reputation for approaching things in certain ways, and we can grow a whole show with the community involved.
And having that as a subscriber-only element is the tease, I guess, to get people in to pay the Patreon subscription.
There's a free tier on the Patreon subscription. Okay. Yeah. So now you can join our Patreon without paying a penny, and that gets you access to some of the content and also allows you to get into the chat rooms and see what's going on and see how you could get involved. And then there is a paid tier, and ultimately they're the people who we will be making the show with. And we're really excited, actually. It's really fun because people are starting to engage meaningfully with it. And that is always thrilling when you have an audience that you are connecting with directly, rather than just passively creating content people go and enjoy it, to actually have a dialogue. It's really fun.
This is quite a big thing in podcasting now, isn't it? To have these extra shows. I know that Danny Robbins does it with Uncanny, and Where There's a Will, There's a Wake do it as well, don't they, with the extra shows. Getting the listeners involved in that way is, I think, one of the ways that podcasting is moving forwards. So is this something you'd been thinking about for a while?
Yeah, when we started talking about podcasts in general, it was always the intention to move towards a space where you have a more dynamic relationship with the people who are enjoying the show. So Russell's made TV shows for a long time, and that's quite a one-way relationship, actually. You make the TV show, it goes out there, and you don't get that feedback loop. Maybe it's not just podcasts, but the online space in general is such an opportunity, really exciting, actually, to have this sort of new form of entertainment where you're making it as a kind of club or community together, where in very fast time, you and the listeners are part of the same joint venture, making this thing together. We find it quite exciting, and as I say, the green shoots of what's coming here make us excited for how it will grow for the future as well.
And I guess for someone like Russell as well, who's used to doing stand-up and working live, getting that interaction from the listeners, that's going to spark ideas with him in the same way as if he got a call out, a heckle or something. He's going to spring off that, isn't he?
I think that's a really great point. When anyone listening to this who's ever been to a stand-up club, if you actually go into a stand-up comedy club, the very best bits, the bit you always remember when the next day, is the thing that happened on the night when someone shouted out something stupid and the comedian responded in a really excellent way. And you're right, this allows that kind of that fizz, I think authenticity is a good word to use, isn't it? You know that thing is authentic because you know it couldn't have been faked. It really is happening, and I think that comes in the podcasts in this interactive sense as well. And yeah, it really plays to Russell's strengths. Russell's one of the best stand-ups in the world. He also is a brilliant interviewer, having developed those skills from 10 years on the TV show of interviewing people. And so to get a bit of both of those skills working together, it could be really, really exciting.
Actually, that's really interesting you put that, because I've written down here, I've been listening, and I've put Russell's got a great way with people. He really puts them at their ease. I listened to the Sarah Pascoe one.
Yeah.
They know each other and have known each other from the circuit very, very well. But it was like just listening to a couple of people chatting down the pub.
Here's a tip, or maybe. Russell doesn't prepare. Deliberately so. On purpose.
Yeah.
So I'm prepared, I'm in the room, and I'm there to make sure that, nobody gets sued or we represent people correctly, all those boring things.
Yeah.
But he deliberately doesn't prepare, because that means that he has to engage authentically and properly with the person in front of him, listen to what they say and respond for real, rather than, people who do radio interviews, often you'll be opposite a radio presenter who's shuffling their notes while they're talking to you and they're thinking about someone else, someone's in their ear. It's chaos. And as the guest, you feel ill at ease and you're suddenly like, this isn't a conversation. But in the studio that we have, we really try to, the idea is that the guests feel at ease. And Russell's got such a skill with that. So it's not just Sarah, who obviously he does know, but we had Linford Christie on a few weeks back, who Russell doesn't know. But again, we still had that same sense of being at ease. And one of the reasons we record in person as well, rather than doing it over Riverside or Zoom or whatever, that connection, that human connection in the studio, you just can't beat it. And so the hope is that our guests end up talking about things that aren't just the usual things that come out in interviews, the same story that they've told 1,000 times before. And so we get little tidbits of real interest. That's the idea. I think that's the space podcasts really work best in, isn't it?
Yeah.
So we had Stephen Merchant talking about his online chess. I had no idea how he trolls people on online chess.
I never knew Sarah Pascoe loved soup so much.
Exactly. That's a great example. We had Joe Marler on, the rugby player, who's usually very rough and tumble, but he was telling us a very moving story about his first dog being put down. And it was really a tender moment. And it felt quite unusual to hear these people who have a certain stereotype of a personality, to hear them in different ways.
What is your first brilliant thing?
If I could have had 5 the same, I would have chosen this one 5 times. And I know that's not the format, and that's why I've respected your format.
Okay.
The best thing for me is soup.
Okay.
Yeah.
Why?
How long have you got? Okay, so the
15
reason...
minutes per section.
Okay, great. Good to clarify. Only 15 minutes. Maybe it goes back to the weaning, right? You know how brilliant vegetables taste separately?
Wow, okay.
Yeah. Don't you think? They're quite nice. Potato. Let's just take potato.
Yeah.
Delicious.
A sweet potato is better than a normal potato.
It's sweeter, so it is better, yeah. Okay. But when you mix all the vegetables together, they taste more exquisite than anything else on this planet.
Right. Okay, that's interesting.
Yeah. So it's like, I was thinking about it like
Except
the colour
for
wheel.
broad beans.
Oh.
Awful vegetable.
My favourite.
Are they?
Oh, do you mean butter beans? Are broad beans and butter beans the same?
I don't know.
No, they're not.
The other day I saw a picture of a broad bean. I thought, it looks like a butter bean. Is this American, Australian, giving him the wrong name?
What kind of realm of the web were you on?
Russell has this way of getting them to open up. And you're very much part of the show as well. We hear you in the background. You chip in sometimes.
Yes, ruin the flow.
You said
whenever
that, not me.
Whenever it sounds like it's really working, I chip in to just break the whole thing.
But that's nice, because it makes it feel even more like it's just people sitting around with a cup of coffee or whatever, and they are having a chat and you're being invited in.
That's the idea. In a way, I mean, if we're talking about the kind of, if there is a craft to it, then the sense is that I hopefully represent the person listening a little bit and can sort of ask for clarification or, try to get them to move in a slightly different direction or, just little nudges here and there.
I said earlier, didn't I, that you've worked with Russell for many years. You're also a writer, producer, stand-up comedian yourself, but you're the producer of this show. Tell me about that presenter-producer relationship. How pivotal is that to produce a good product? I
can only speak on my own behalf, of course, and there's a lot of producers who appear as part of the podcast now. It's become a thing, hasn't it?
And it happens in linear radio. I used to get my producer on sometimes, or when I was a producer, they used to get me on, and that's been happening, but it's quite new on podcasts, I think.
I think the benefit it certainly has is from my own point of view, I feel very relaxed to chip in because I have the producer tag. I've done lots of work before as a performer or as a stand-up. And once you've got that tag on you, the expectation is for you to be funny at every point, whatever you say. And that can be counterproductive, actually. People having that tag on them means that they maybe behave in a way that's too goofy for what's going to produce the best thing. So as a producer, you can be serious, you can be silly, but if you're being funny, it's not expected, so it has a little more value. And then, I get to do the edit, of course, so it means that I can cut out the worst of the interjections.
That's always the great thing, though, being the one who's in charge of the edit, isn't it?
I feel like it adds something, and I certainly, when I listen to other shows, I do enjoy that producer role because it allows that person to be more sparing and more incisive when they do chip in. And that's when it's used best. From myself, when I'm at my worst is when I'm talking too much. And I think that always pulling it back is the right thing because people are there to listen to Russell, who's a wonderful interviewer, with this special guest we've brought in. I'm quite mindful that I'm there to just sort of nudge it.
You do get great guests, obviously. I should imagine yours and Russell's address books are stuffed full of interesting people. But because Avalon is a management company as well as making the podcast, I guess you've got access to all kinds of people. Who have you got coming up that you can tell us about?
It is obviously beneficial having the management company making it as well, but it's the same process, actually. We still have to place that call within Avalon and say, is this person free? Would they like to come on? And sometimes they will say, it's just not going to work or it's not going to happen. And coming up, we've got some fantastic guests. We've got Vogue Williams, who's, within podcasting, a huge name. And then Rachel Riley, we're recording with in the new year. We've got Al Murray, who's just endlessly interesting and brilliantly funny. I think one of Britain's most underrated comedians, actually. He's just so good.
He's so knowledgeable and intelligent, and particularly about military and Second World War and history.
Well, once you get him started on that, he will not stop. It's brilliant. Then Jack Mate as well, who again within podcasting is about as big as it gets. So it's what we like to do, what we keep an eye on is keeping the guest booking varied. Whilst it's really fun to have comedians and talk to comedians, we try to mix that up with some unusual and unexpected guests, which hopefully keeps people interested in what's coming each week.
Another part of the partnership that you've got going on, you've obviously got Avalon and Patreon, but there's Adelicious. Adelicious, well, they worked with you on Wonderbox. It actually were the first Avalon title to join for that hosting and monetization network. Now they're working with you on 5 Brilliant Things. So how does that work? Because I know that you and Russell do some of the adverts as well.
Advert reads, so we have got a lovely relationship with Adelicious. They're really helpful, and they put in front of us what's on the table for that week. We sort of make selections about who we would like to work with, and then occasionally there's the opportunity to do one of those sponsored reads, and it's quite fun, actually.
You have fun with those, you two, don't you?
Yeah. Exactly. So it's quite a fun little logic puzzle, isn't it? Because you have to get across the information respectfully for the person who's wanting the content out there, but you also have to square it with yourself of how you're going to sort of stay the right side of being funny and light with it. So you quite enjoy them, to be honest.
Yeah, and I think they add something as well, and having both of you do them, and then we hear you later on as well. It's
and if people really don't like them, then the podcast is available without all the adverts through the Patreon. So the options are all available.
I saw a different side to Russell because I've enjoyed his stand-up over the years, but as an interviewer, I just thought, wow, he listens, and that's the most important thing.
Exactly. I think people don't give him enough credit, I think people don't realise quite how skilled he is in that department because we know him as a stand-up, and people get put in one box. And so that's another thing. On the original photograph we had on the Wonderbox podcast main artwork, it was a picture of Russell doing stand-up. Whereas now we have moved in a way that hopefully shows that he'll be doing these interviews, and it shows that other side to him that is just as good in a different way.
A big thank you to Dan Atkinson for being my guest. And you can find Russell Howard's 5 Brilliant Things on all major podcast platforms. It's a great listen. Applications from Content is Queen for micro-grants for podcasters are open now until the 3rd of January. This is for individuals who want to create original pilots or special episodes within an existing series. To find out if you're eligible to apply and more details, then visit their website, contentisqueen.org/microgrants for Podcasters Programme 2024. Did you know you can now buy a membership to the Radio Academy as a gift? Perfect for Christmas. You can gift a membership to a friend or colleague, or you can donate a membership. The Radio Academy gives free memberships to individuals to support their career development and support people at all stages of their audio careers, with a focus on those who might be underrepresented in the industry or not have the means to pay the costs involved out of their own pocket. Go to radioacademy.org, membership account, membership levels to find out more. And I'll see you next week.